this on my own about 100 times. And each time I would visualize how members of the Sangha from the very first day
head of the Pali department at Chan State Buddhist University in Myanmar and contributing to canonical text projects in Thailand. Is an accomplished translator and editor ที่ยานิพนธ์ก็ท่านก็จะมาเป็นผู้อยู่ที่ Chan State Buddhist University ด้วยก็วันนี้ท่านก็จะมาให้ความรู้กับพวกเราในเรื่องของทำอย่างไรให้พระวินัยคงอยู่สืบ So he will give a talk on the topic of preserving the Dhamma Vinaya. What does it take? So ready? So
Thank you very much, Pante, for this very kind introduction. And because we have some technical problems to fix the slides, may I begin by thanking the venerable members of the Sangha for inviting me to participate in this wonderful seminar on the preservation of the Dhamma and Vinaya. As you know, I am a scholar of the text and I'm not a monk myself. This is, by the way, my first time in Buddha Monton, and I'm very much impressed with the compound and the buildings and the beauty of the site, with the nature and the temples. So yeah, some of the paintings and the boards that I saw here somehow reminded me why the Dhamma and the Vinaya, they stand very strong in Thailand. And it's difficult for the Dhamma and Vinaya to stay strong in the West. As you know, maybe, and I'm speaking in English, but perhaps someone can translate later. One of the problems that we have in the West, in Europe, for instance, is that we are not worrying too much about how to keep the Dhamma and the Vinaya strong. We worry about just having it. There are very, very few monasteries in Europe, and there are many, many people who are interested in practicing and learning Buddhism. I teach Pali online and also in person, but mostly nowadays online, to people speaking Spanish in Europe and in America, also in English in Europe and in America. And there are many people interested in Dhamma and Vinaya, but it's very difficult to find places to practice and to learn. In Thailand and in Asia, you are blessed because you need to worry about how to make it long-lasting, how to make it last long. We are worrying on how to make it happen. We don't have it yet. And the way this seminar is presented, when I was seeing some of the boards, it reminded me also about the importance of lay people being lay people and the monastics being monastics, keeping the Vinaya. One of the main differences between the Dhamma and the Vinaya in Asia and in the West is that in the West, if you allow me to say it this way, many lay people, they think they are monks, and many monks, they think they are lay people. So the lay people go around like just because they are Buddhist, they go around like they are arahats sometimes. but that doesn't mean that they practice the Vinaya. They are just interested in meditation sometimes, and they like to sit down and practice. But many lay people, they don't see the importance of dana and the precepts for the lay people. That means generosity and supporting the sasana through the gifts to the monks and the nuns. And similarly, because we don't have monasteries, and we don't have, at least we don't have many monasteries, and we don't have many institutions to learn and practice the Dhamma and the Vinaya, many teachers who are teachers of the Dhamma, they have to make a living. They are lay people, really. Even though they are teachers of the Dhamma, they get a fee for their course, and they have to live like lay people. That's why I was saying that our problem is that the lay people think that they are monks, and the teachers who are supposed to be monks live like lay people. So in this case, we cannot even begin to worry about the real Dhamma and the real Vinaya. We are happy to have a few monasteries from Asia that are settled in Europe. And here, perhaps my closest reference is the Oxford Sayadaw, which is the Oxford Buddha Vihara. There are many, but still it's very small compared to Thailand or compared to Asia. So I would like to share my mudita for the fact that even though sometimes the perception in Thailand might be that the Vinaya is in danger, trust me, it is not that much in danger compared to other places. Now, I'm not so sure the technical problem is solved yet. I cannot see if the slides are already there. Please let me check 1 second. We're working on it. Well, then, since we are waiting for the technical problem to be solved, and this is part of anicca, maybe I will share a few words about the idea I had in presenting these slides, or just what I had in mind when I was very kindly invited to participate in this seminar. As you know, and I said it before, sorry, my main job is to work on text, and I feel a little bit humbled if I'm asked to say something about how to preserve the Vinaya, because generally this is something that is the task of the monastics. So mostly I'm going to talk about the Dhamma in the sense of the text, and I'm going to talk about an area that is mostly my area of expertise, that is called philology. Because we have English to Thai translation, I hope that even though my maybe introductory speech is not very clear to some of you, but the slideshow will become more clear. And I will be talking about the importance to broaden our perspectives when we study, the importance to know what other people think in order to have a proper debate with those who don't think like us, or maybe those who belong to different traditions, because this debate is always part of the religious life. Now I think we are about to solve the technical problem. I apologize for that. Very good. So thank you so much for your patience. And again, may I pay respect to the venerable members of the Sangha and all the Sayadaws and teachers here. And also a warm welcome to all the lay people. So thank you for coming to this talk. As you can see, it is in line with the main topic of the series these days. The title is very generic, very general, preserving the Dhamma and Vinaya, the Dhamma Vinaya. What does it take? I do not mean to be comprehensive, and I do not mean to explain the only possible way to preserve the Dhamma Vinaya. There are many, as the Buddha himself taught, but I'm just going to share my own experience and one way that I think the academic study of the Dhamma Vinaya can be done. So one of the main concerns among Theravada Buddhists is to preserve the Dhamma Vinaya for a long time. Chidam Tittatu Dhammam. That's the saying. Chidam Tittatu Dhammo. So the Dhamma and the Vinaya have to last for a long time because the appearance of the Buddha is very rare. But even when the Buddha appears, as you know very well, the Dhamma will last only for a certain period of time. And even though we know that eventually the Dhamma and the Vinaya are bound to disappear, like everything else, and they will come back with the next Buddha, it is nevertheless our duty to make it last for as long as possible. It is a common misunderstanding, however, that in order to do so, in order to preserve the Dhamma Vinaya for a long time, an open debate and a re-examination of the doctrinal foundations of Theravada needs to be avoided. What I mean by that is that it's very common, at least I have seen that in some students, that there is a fear. Some students are afraid to tackle or to address certain issues just because they feel that if we ask questions, we are questioning the validity of the Dhamma and the Vinaya. That doesn't need to be the case. In fact, the tradition will show, as I will say in a few moments, the tradition shows that the preservation of the Dhamma and the Vinaya has been accomplished by openly facing criticisms and not remaining silent when an unjust criticism is being made. The very foundations of Theravada Buddhism as a distinct school of Buddhism may be summarized in these 2 points. The ability to articulate a doctrine that critically assimilates or refutes other schools. And number 2, the use of Pali and the strict preservation of the classic texts through the study of grammar and philology. Now here you can see 3 boxes. One is India. So when we study Buddhism, we study the Dhamma and the Vinaya. We say Dhamma and Vinaya. These are not Thai words. These are not Burmese words. These are not Spanish words or English words. They are words that come from India. So we all know that India is the motherland of Buddhism. And when we study the origins of Buddhism, we study Indian culture or ancient Indian culture. But as you know very well, in India, there are many cultures.
Use the tab key to navigate and press space to toggle an option.
Okay. There are many traditions. There are Buddhists. The Buddhists in the past had been very, very important. Probably for that reason they disappeared, because they were the most important institution in terms of education. But there were many others, schools of philosophy, religion, monastic schools. So you have what we generally call Hinduism, that encompasses a very large number of cults and texts and religions. We have Jainism. In the Pali text, you also know about the Ajivikas. There are Charvakas or materialists. And there are, in short, there are many, many schools, many traditions. And they were all historically in a dialogue with Buddhism. Buddhism was not alone, and Buddhism was not isolated. Then if we think about Asia a little bit more broadly, we have that there is Buddhism in Asia. Almost in every corner of the Asian continent, Buddhism has arrived, and even beyond, in places where nowadays we would think that Buddhism is not part of the local culture. If you just think of Indonesia, Malaysia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, these seem to be countries that are not part of the Buddhist tradition, but even these countries were very important. Some of them were key to the development of early Buddhism and Buddhist literature, Dhamma, the Vinaya, and so on. So when we study Asia, or when we think of Asia, also we need to consider that there is Buddhism, but also in every region of this very large geography, we have other traditions that are non-Buddhist. For instance, I just mentioned Malaysia and Indonesia, which are the majority of the religious people in these countries practice Islam. And then there is China, for instance, which is technically one of the important Buddhist countries in the world. But after the Communist Revolution, it is the role of Buddhism in society has probably gone to a more marginal or private dimension of people's lives, but nevertheless it's there, along with other traditions like the Taoism, Confucianism, etc. And something similar happens in Japan. If you have studied a little bit the history of Japan, there is Buddhism, but Buddhism is mixed up with many local traditions, then like Shinto and other cults. So this is just bound to happen. And even if you think of Theravada countries, not all of them are exactly the same. Each region in Theravada countries has its own peculiar features. So again, to understand the Dhamma and the Vinaya of the Buddhists, we need to understand what is non-Buddhist. Then even more broadly, in the world, as you know, there are big debates between what we would call religion or the spiritual path, and then other approaches to life that exclude religion positively or negatively. They try to avoid religion. Many people in the world don't like religion. This is a fact. It's not just a problem of Buddhism, it's a problem with religion in general. And then we also need to understand what the people who don't like or avoid religion altogether, what do they think? This I summarize as a secularism. That means that is a word that is difficult to explain, but originally secularism would be something very similar to lokiya in Pali. It's what has to do only with the world, not with whatever transcends this world. So because in Buddhism we have what is lokuttara, then the secularism avoids lokuttara. It only stays with lokiya, the loki, whatever is worldly. That is secularism, what belongs to our time and place. And there is also another tradition that is very prominent, especially in the West, that is called the Enlightenment tradition. And if you have seen that sometimes, enlightenment, for most Buddhists, enlightenment means the Sambodhi, the enlightenment of the Buddha. Yeah, the enlightenment of the Buddha, who is the enlightened one. But if you go to Europe, the enlightenment is a period of time around the end of the 18th century where some philosophers, they decided that the path of reason and knowledge had to break away with the old religious thought of the church, basically, or Christianity. But they believed in science and the role of reason and science as the main leads to awakening, not necessarily meditation or this kind of Buddhist practice. So this is just a kind of map starting from India of aspects that, in my opinion, are important when we are thinking of the preservation of Dhamma Vinaya, because that means preserving it in a certain environment. Yeah. What I'm saying is a little bit, suppose there is a certain animal, a certain wild animal that is very rare, very precious, and we don't want that kind of species to disappear. If we only study that species, that is not enough. We need to see what are the other species that are living the same ecosystem. So this is a little bit what I'm trying to. It is undeniable that Theravada Buddhism, in its early commentaries, has never shunned, that has never avoided debate with other forms of Buddhism or with other religions and philosophies. Two fundamental texts that illustrate Theravada engagement with other schools are the Katavattu, you may know. In English, it has been translated as points of controversy, but some other scholars, they prefer to translate it as topics for debate. Both translations are correct, but it is true that one part of the Katavattu, according to tradition, has to do with controversies or big disagreements within the Sangha at the time of Ashoka. But it is also true that some of these disagreements are not that dramatic, and we can understand them as examples of early debate amidst the Sangha. Then the second text that I consider very important, even though it's not canonical, it's paracanonical, but it's very important to understand or to illustrate the Theravada engagement with other schools, is the Milinda Panya, the questions of King Milinda, that has been translated into several languages. I'm sure there is also a Thai version of it. As you know, this is a dialogue between a Buddhist monk and a Greek king. Nowadays, that would be a Westerner, a Phalang. So there is a Phalang king who asks many Phalang questions, typical of the nowadays of the Europeans and skeptics, people who don't believe in any religion. That's the role of King Milinda. And he asks many questions to Venerable Nagasena, who is able to answer them successfully. And as we are reminded in the introduction of that book, the role of Nagasena is to avoid the destruction of the Dhamma Vinaya. In the story of the Milinda Panya that you probably know, Nagasena was previously God living in the world of Devas. And the Arahants called him to go down to the world to debate with the King Milinda and save the Dhamma Vinaya. Similarly, you may remember that in the Vinaya commentary, in the Samanta Pasadika, Moggaliputta Tissa Thera, the convener of the Third Council and legendary or not legendary, credited with the authorship of Katavattu, even Moggaliputta Tissa Thera was formerly a Brahma god. He was also living in the Brahma world very happily. But the Arahants, some Arahants came to see him and asked, please go down to the world. We need you because the Dhamma Vinaya is in danger and we need you to come down and save it. The way Moggaliputta Tissa Thera saved the Dhamma Vinaya, according to our sources, was through the debate. It was a debate. So in both cases, we find an example of a major teacher in the Theravada tradition that engages with people who think differently in order to clarify points that are difficult. And these points cannot be clarified if we remain silent and we don't handle them. So there are different types of questions in these two texts. There are general definitions according to the science of the time. Means both Moggaliputta, Tissa, and Nagasena, they were actually knowledgeable of worldly and otherworldly or supramundane matters. So a monastic nowadays, a student of the Dhamma and Vinaya, should also be well acquainted with the science of our time. This is in the same way that these ancient teachers were acquainted with the science of their time. Then many times, this is number two, they focus on internal contradictions in the Dhamma Vinaya. So it is inevitable, as you know, that when you read the whole of the Sutta Pitaka and the Abhidhamma and also the Vinaya, you may find here and there things that seem to be contradictory. If you say this, you cannot say that. If you say that, you cannot say this. How is this possible if the Buddha says this in that place? And so on. So these types of contradictions are openly discussed in both the Kathavatu and also the Milinda Panya. And then number 3 is also very important. It's the epistemological problems. Epistemological means how do we know what we know? It's the theory of knowledge. How do we know the things that we know? It's not just what we know, but how do we know it? And how can we possibly know things that are true or that are valid? This sometimes is discussed through logic or through other types of sciences. Now, the Milinda Panya, especially in the first books, offers clear and often innovative definitions of terms such as sati, mindfulness, and panya. So giving definitions is very important. For instance, I'm going to read the English translation. The king asked, Venerable Nagasena, what is the distinguishing characteristic of attention, and what is the distinguishing characteristic of wisdom? Examination is the distinguishing characteristic of attention, and severing is the distinguishing characteristic of wisdom. How does attention have the distinguishing characteristic of examination? And how does wisdom have the distinguishing characteristic of severing or cutting off? Please give me an analogy, the king says. And Nagasena answers, do you know barley reapers, your majesty? And the king says, yes, venerable sir, I know them. Then Nagasena says, how, your majesty, do barley reapers reap barley? And the king says, venerable sir, they take a sheaf of barley in the left hand, and they take a sickle in the right hand, and they cut with the sickle. Then Nagasena explains, just as, your majesty, a barley reaper takes a sheaf of barley in the left hand, takes a sickle in the right hand, and cuts the barley, in the same way, your majesty, does the spiritual aspirant take hold of the mind with attention and cut off the defilements with wisdom. Indeed, thus, your majesty, examination is a distinguishing characteristic of attention, and severing is the distinguishing characteristic of wisdom. And then the king says, you are clever, Venerable Nagasena. He is convinced. With regard to internal contradictions, Nagasena is not afraid of replying to Milinda's difficult questions. Nagasena presents the model of an Abhidhamma scholar, or he represents the model or the archetype of an Abhidhamma scholar that excels in refuting the most aggressive attacks. Yeah, that is also something that the Buddha handles in the Brahmajala Sutta. If someone attacks the Dhamma Vinaya, the best way is not to attack back and attack aggressively. The best way is to dismantle the argument piece by piece. So Nagasena does this without ever becoming anxious or defensive. He uses reason, good arguments, and powerful similes. This is an example. The king says, Venerable Nagasena, it has been said by the Blessed One that a deliberate lie is an offense of the greatest kind, involving exclusion from the order. And again he said, by a deliberate lie, a bhikkhu commits a minor offense, one that ought to be the subject of confession made before another member of the order. So this is a contradiction or apparent contradiction in the Dhamma Vinaya. Lying is to be punished with the parajika, or lying is just a minor apatti. Now, Venerable Nagasena, what is here in the distinction? What is the reason that by one lie a bhikkhu is cast out of the order, and by another lie is guilty only of an offense that can be atoned for? In the first decision, if the first decision be right, then the second must be wrong. But if the second be right, then the first must be wrong. This too is a double-edged problem now put to you, and you have to solve it. Both of your questions, says Nagasena, O king, are correct. But a falsehood is a light or heavy offense according to the subject matter. For what do you think, great king? Suppose a man were to give another a slap with his hand. What punishment would you inflict upon him? If the other refused to overlook the matter, then neither should we be able to pardon his assailant. But should you mulct, I think there is a typo here, him with a penny or so. But on the other hand, suppose it had been you yourself that he had given the blow to. What would then be the punishment? You should condemn him to have his hands cut off and his feet cut off, to be skinned alive, and we should confiscate all the goods of his house and put to death all his family to the 7th generation on both sides. So here, leaving aside the cruelty of the king, the point is that Nagasena is forcing his interlocutor to solve the problem by himself, and this is a very wise thing to do. Now, we also talked about epistemological problems. Both the Katavattu and the Milindapanya address deep epistemological problems through reason and sound arguments, not through mere faith or arguments based on authority. This also reminds of the Kalama Sutta that I'm sure you're all familiar with. The Katavattu's refutation of the Sabbāttivāda, in Sanskrit Sarvastivāda, is a good example of thorough logical reasoning. Even though logical reasoning is not sufficient for insight, vipassana, it is nevertheless an important instrument when exchanging opinions with those who maintain different views. It is the best instrument to handle wrong view. But in order to refute wrong view, or a view that contradicts the Dhamma Vinaya, the Buddha has always recommended to base the defense in the facts, that is, in the reality, yatha bhutam, in what is real. This also involves a proper understanding of the rival position. For this reason, it is inevitable that those who wish to maintain the Dhamma Vinaya in its pristine purity, they need to study other philosophies as well, as Moggaliputta Tissa and Nagasena did. You can see an example here. I don't know how many of you know about Sabbāttivāda or Sarvastivāda. Do you know about Sarvastivāda? How many people know about Sarvastivāda Buddhism? Not many, few. But you know, the Sabbāttivāda is one of the main rivals, so to say, of the Katavattu. So if we don't understand Sabbāttivāda, we cannot understand Katavattu. Also, we cannot understand the Milindapanya, because in the Milindapanya, which is a Pali text, is Theravada, sometimes there is an argument that refers to the Sabbāttivāda. So the term Sabbāttivāda, as you understand from the word, it means Sabbam Atti. Sabbam Atti. Everything exists. But what is everything? Everything means everything in all the three times: in the past, in the present, and in the future. That means that the Dhammas do not have a momentary, or they do not exist only in the present moment, as we say in Theravada. But the Sabbāttivādins, who were a very strong Buddhist school, they believe that the Dhammas, or some Dhammas at least, exist in the past. That means they always exist in the past and in the present and in the future. And they did so because they had reasons to believe that in order to explain the causality and karma, we needed to accept that the actions, the karma that was done in the past, had the effect in the future. So for instance, if I do something wrong today, the result will come maybe next year or maybe in 5 years. And when the result comes, the cause should be there. Because this is Paticca Samuppada. When the cause is there, the result is there. When the condition is there, the result. So if the result is there, the cause should also be there. That means that the past karma should exist. This kind of argument is more or less what represents the Sabbam Atti, that everything exists, of the Sabbativada. But of course, the Theravadins, the ancient Theravadins, they were very much familiar with this, and they disagreed. In Theravada, only the present Dhammas exist, and it can be technically accepted that some of the past Dhammas that have not taken fruition yet, it can also be considered as existing. But mostly, it's the present Dhammas that exist, not past, not future. Now, the Theravadin in the Katavatu says, you say that all exists. Hereby, you are involved in these further admissions. All exists everywhere, at all times, in every way, in all things, not in a combined state. The non-existent exists. The right view, which looks upon your wrong view as wrong, exists. You can see there are a series of logical arguments here that the Theravadin is putting forward. Again, taking all in terms of time, you affirm that the past exists, the future exists, the present exists. But it is not the past something that has already ceased, that is departed, changed, gone away, gone utterly away. How then can you say the past exists? Again, it is not the future something that is not yet born, not yet come to be, not yet come to pass. It has not happened, not befallen, not manifested. How then can you say the future exists? The present, you say, exists. And the present is something that has as yet not ceased, not departed, not changed, not gone away, not utterly gone away. And the past, you say, exists. Then you should say of the past also that it has not ceased, not departed, and so on. Again, the present, you say, exists. That is born, has become, has come to pass, has happened, has befallen, is manifested. And the future, you say, exists. Then you should say of the future also that it is born, has become, and so on. So this is just a very short passage of the Katavatu, and it is the English translation that is summarizing the Pali. The Pali is a little bit more complex, but to me, this is a very good example of Theravada philosophy that is not less complex or less interesting than the Madhyamaka philosophy that many people are so excited about. For instance, Nagarjuna. As you know, that Nagarjuna in the Mahayana or in the Madhyamaka philosophy, Nagarjuna is the most famous teacher. He's so famous that some people claim that he was he set in motion the Dhamma wheel again. So he's almost put at the same level as the Buddha. And it seems to me that from the Theravada side, sometimes we are not enough, proactive to show that we also have very high caliber texts in philosophy and epistemology, and not just the suttas, which is of course the treasure and the core, but we also have philosophical texts that they have nothing to envy to Nagarjuna. It's actually on the contrary. Probably Nagarjuna has a depth to these older texts. And this is just an example. But this is also something that shows us the way to defend and to preserve the Dhamma and the Vinaya. Then the Pali and Theravada students aiming at the preservation of the Dhamma Vinaya in international debates must keep in mind two areas of expertise that have become essential. Philosophy is number one, and the historical philological method is number two. I can give you a very good example of a combination of these two skills. I don't know how many of you know about Bhikkhu Analayo. Anyone knows Bhikkhu Analayo? Analayo Bhikkhu? Okay, some of you. Probably he's much more famous in the West for good reasons. But in the West, he's definitely one of the leading Buddhist scholars in our time. And the reason, I think, why he is a leading scholar is because he is a practitioner. He's mainly a meditator. He's not just an intellectual monk. So that converts him in an authority in meditation, but also, and perhaps that especially, because he is a very thorough philologist. He has studied many languages, and he publishes books that compare the Pali texts with the Chinese agamas and the Tibetan texts of the Kanjur and the texts from other Indian traditions in Sanskrit or in Gandhari and other schools. So through his life, he has been following the historical philological method in order to try to understand better the Dhamma and the Vinaya. Of course, his conclusions are his own. Doesn't mean that we all share his point of view, but his method is very impressive, and I think it is a good model for the rest of us. Also, he doesn't shun philosophy. That means offering his own understanding of the sources. And he has published many books that combine the historical philological method in order to examine the sources, the primary sources. He always tries to go back to the primary sources, to the origins. But then he also tries to keep up with modern psychology, modern philosophy, and modern thought, so that in this way he can convey the old ideas to the new listeners, to the present day listeners. In our tradition, in the Theravada tradition, we have philology. It's not new. Probably Theravada philology is older than Western philology, but sometimes we don't remember that. To the right-hand side, you can see, if it's the same slide, yeah, you can see an example of an important manual for philology in English by Martin West. It's textual criticism and editorial technique. It's very much about the analysis and the study of manuscripts. And in Pali, we have a term that is called visodhana. Visodhana. Also, you probably know the term sasana visodhana, the purification of the sasana, which is one of the mechanisms that the Sangha has utilized through history in order to preserve the Dhamma and Vinaya in its pristine light. So textual criticism is the art of editing the text on the basis of a critical assessment of its manuscript witnesses. This is a very long sentence, but basically it means it is the art of to remove mistakes from the manuscripts. The discipline has a long history in the West, but it also has its own history in Asia. Especially Buddhist scholars of all periods have paid careful attention to the preservation and editions of manuscripts. In Pali, textual criticism is called visodhana. That means purification. That means cleaning up the manuscripts. This in the past was done with manuscripts. Nowadays we use printed books, and probably even more often we use the internet and electronic means. But nevertheless, this is one of our ways to keep the Dhamma and the Vinaya alive. A few years ago, I published an article for those who are interested in seeing traditional Theravada philology in action. The article is called Purifying the Patimokkha, Pali Grammar and Buddhist Law, that means Buddhist Vinaya, in 17th century Hamsavati. And I use the term Hamsavati in purpose because we cannot say exactly that Hamsavati was Myanmar or Thailand or any other thing. It was basically Hamsavati was Hamsavati, and it was a kingdom with its own traditions. So this text was written there in a specific historical context, that is the context of the Burmese proper occupation of the territory. And political stories aside, what's interesting is that some of the monastic teachers that accompanied the king, the court, they became interested in compiling a Patimokkha text that would follow the manuscripts of Hamsavati, that means the Mon, the Burmese, and also the manuscripts from Haripunja from northern Thailand, what today is northern Thailand, that means Lanna, and other regions. So they compile many different types of manuscripts, and when they were comparing the manuscripts of Patimokkha, the author of this book, the Patimokkha Visodhana, in Thailand you have a book by Yanakitti called Patimokkha Ganti, that is same thing. And in these books, you can see how ancient scholars, or scholars a few centuries ago, they worked with philology using Pali and using Pali grammars, Pali commentaries, in order to solve textual problems. Now, the edition and translation with comments of Pali manuscripts is a perfect way to preserve the Dhamma Vinaya. And here, perhaps I'm coming more to my own area to encourage everyone to work on this area, because, of course, the canonical manuscripts have been edited, even though they need more examination. But there are many more books in Pali, and probably bilingual Pali and Thai, or Pali Burmese, local commentaries to the Pali texts, etc., that they still remain in manuscript form, and they haven't seen the light yet. So one good way to preserve and to keep the Dhamma Vinaya alive is to work on such texts. As I said at the beginning, I'm not saying that this is the only way. I'm saying it's one more way to help the promotion and the preservation of Dhamma Vinaya. Today, Pali manuscripts are easily available through digital repositories. There are many digital libraries online that you can visit, and you can actually download many hundreds of manuscripts. This is something that is quite amazing, considering how difficult it has been through history to access even only one manuscript. Probably not in Thailand, probably not in Myanmar, but certainly throughout the world it has been very difficult. And I would say even in Theravada countries, the production of manuscripts was not that easy. We know that in certain periods, like in the Pagan period in Myanmar, the production of one set of the Tipitaka, the writing in palm leaf manuscripts, one set of the Tipitaka had the same cost as building a pagoda. And you have seen the pagodas in Pagan. They were very costly. Today, maybe we can say it's as costly as building one of the great skyscrapers of Bangkok. So in the past, books were very difficult to come across. Not many people knew how to read them. So today we are privileged that we have so many tools to learn Pali and to read Pali, to use electronic editions, but not only electronic editions. We can even work on manuscripts without leaving our bedroom, literally. I know many friends who nowadays they don't leave their bedroom. They stay there because they can see everything. And if they don't have a manuscript, they can call someone in a certain place, take a few pictures of the manuscript, and then you can read it. So this is also a good way to preserve this rich heritage of literature that we have in Theravada Buddhism, because after all, as you can see here, for instance, in these shelves, the Dhamma and the Vinaya cannot be better represented than a collection of books and texts. So these digital repositories are one more reason to encourage especially young scholars to take on philology and the study of the text, without ever forgetting about all the other aspects, of course, but including this one, I'm sure it's going to be very helpful in the future, as it has been in the past. So that is all from my side. Bhavatu Sabba Mangalam. Thank you so much.
Okay, much Dr. Alex for being very today talk. Any questions from the audience? มีใครมีคำถามกับดร. Alex บ้างไหมท่านได้แสดงคำพีร์ประสบการณ์ในการผ่านภาษาวิพากษ์วิทยาที่เอาศาสนาเทรวาสมาปรับใช้เพื่อจะสู้กับสายปรัชญาอื่นๆเรียกว่าเก็บไว้แต่ว่าเปิดเผยอย่างในมิลินทปัญหาหรือว่า คาถาวัตถุซึ่งวาดมันก็ให้ความสำคัญกับการเอามาเปิดเผยเอามาคุยมีใคร
Okasa from the Mahasangha. Dr. Alex, thank you for your lecture. So I need to ask one question that we know that textual criticism is like a technique for is common for the entire world because they have some like traditions from the previous history of books. So they have like Westerners, they do the textual criticism as a one technique to preserve their history or preserve their historical books. So in the Buddhism, we also have a textual criticism that you call the word Visodhana. We can call Pata Visodhana or Pata Sodhana or whatever the thing. What are the like specialities about the like a Buddhist textual criticism than the other Westerners, what they call the textual criticism? Are there any specialities what we can identify in our like a Buddhist scholarly textual criticism?
Thank you very much, Bante. I think this is a very good question that I didn't address because this would have taken more time. But of course, the answer is yes. There are a few features or a few special differences, but even though they are a few, they are important. The main difference is that in the West, textual criticism began in the ancient world with the study of Greek poetry, the epic poetry of the Greeks, that is Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. You may know that because sometimes there are TV, films or movies of the Iliad with Brad Pitt and so on. So maybe some people know, but these originally were ancient poems, and many centuries later, around the 3rd century or the 2nd century before the Common Era, in the library of Alexandria in Egypt, which even though we call it Egypt, but that Alexandria was, as the name indicates, it was a city founded by Alexander the Great, in the same way that the city where King Melinda was born was also called Alexandria. So that was part of the same wall, and these Greeks were interested in recovering the meaning of this ancient text. For them, they were already ancient, and it started at that time. They compiled manuscripts and they began to develop certain techniques. But what we call textual criticism today, mostly developed through the Protestant reform in Europe. That means Luther, and when the Protestant Church in Europe, they tried to rewrite the Bible on the basis of different manuscript traditions or different versions, not just the Latin version, the Latin, the Greek, the Aramaic, Hebrew, or etc. So that kind of thought, the comparative thought, comparing many different sources, is what you can still see in some German scholars that are bhikkhus, like Bhikkhu Analayo. They are German. This tradition comes from that time. Then one special feature of textual criticism after the 15th century or a little bit earlier in Europe is the recovery of the ancient classics, that is the Greek and Roman literature. In many cases, this is an important difference. In many cases, only a few manuscripts or a few fragments were found. Not many. Like for instance, in Pali, if you look for manuscripts of the Digha Nikaya, you'll have thousands existing manuscripts. It's difficult to put them all in one room, but they exist. In Thailand, there are many hundreds. In Myanmar, there are many hundreds. In Sri Lanka, many hundreds. Over the world, many other hundreds. So you would find literally more than 1,000 manuscripts. So there is no way we can use 1,000 or more manuscripts to read them all and see all the minor differences. Text is very much consistent because there's been a lot of copying through the history. But in Europe, that didn't happen. Some of these manuscripts, they arrived in Italy, what we call Italy today, in the 15th century when the Turks, the Ottomans, took Constantinople. That was a very big dramatic moment in Europe. I don't know if you are aware of that, but in 1453 or so, Turkey took Constantinople. That's why since then, only we call it Constantinople. Everyone else calls it Istanbul. We call it Istanbul. The city of Istanbul. I think even the word Istanbul comes from Constantinopolis. That is Istan, and Bul is polis. That is a city. So Istanbul is in the Western European mindset or ideary. That's Constantinople. That was the last city preserving the Roman tradition in Greek and Latin. So many of the scholars there, they fled to Italy, to Venice and other places with which they had contacts. And then Italy received hundreds of manuscripts from the ancient world. And they started reading them. They started looking for people who could read them. And they started recovering that lost tradition. So this is the first distinction. In Europe, textual criticism is very much about recovering something that we have lost. But in Buddhism, I think it's more about keeping clean. It's a housekeeping, keeping everything in order. But it's something that we already have, and we have plenty of manuscripts. So the goal is not exactly the same. Now what happens? Many times, as you can see in the Pali Text Society editions or other articles and editions of Pali texts written by Western philologists, is that their goal is not to teach the Dhamma, mainly, most of the time. Most of the time, they are not in favor or against the Dhamma. They just ignore it. Their goal is to go back to the original language of Buddhism. You may have seen that in some publications. This is an important discussion that many philologists think about, and they consider it central in deciding which readings of the Tipitaka are correct and which readings are incorrect. You see that there are variant readings in the Tipitaka all over the place. We just need to compare the Burmese edition with the Sinhalese edition, or just the Sinhalese manuscript with the Burmese manuscript, or a Thai manuscript. There are many differences. There are small differences, but there are many. So if it's just one small difference, it's okay. But if there are thousands and thousands of small differences, the sheer volume makes it something that needs some attention. So the approach of the Sangha is to just try to find the reading that conveys the idea the best way possible. And the approach of Western scholars, and I say Western in a very general way, but I think you understand what I mean, Western philologists, the approach is many times to just ignore about Dhamma or non-Dhamma. They focus on philology and they try to see a word that is closer to Vedic Sanskrit or something like this. So they try to recover the dialectal form that is more ancient. Because of this, many times they discuss and they deal with Buddhist literature in a way that would not be very much acceptable within the Sangha. For instance, I give you one example. In Thailand, the Vesantara, I don't know exactly how you call the Vesantara Jataka, but you know what I mean, the Vesantara. Yeah, Vesantara Jataka is very famous, not only in the Pali text, it's part of Thai culture. But if you read what one very famous philologist, Pali philologist in Europe said, like that is Ludwig Alsdorf, he basically says that this is not a Buddhist text. There's something, in summary, says, if you study this text philologically, you can see that originally this is not a Buddhist text. It's just a legend that has nothing to do with Buddhism. This is the inference and the point of view of someone who is not interested in the content of the story. They are ready to ignore parts of it in favor of other parts if that helps them reach their goal, that is to find the most ancient reading possible, which means that their method is not totally not totally, it's a correct method, but there is a certain agenda behind, and the purpose is not the same as the purpose of the Sangha. So for this reason, I think perhaps some students, when they see that Western scholars, perhaps like myself, although I don't belong to that kind of line, but some Western scholars come here to Thailand and they tell you this text is not Buddhist, this text is fake, it's Pali, that, and you may wonder, how do they know that? They are following a certain methodology that in itself is quite strong, but sometimes it doesn't align with the aims of the Sangha. So the traditional philology of Visodhana, it is 100% aligned with the aims of the Sasana and of the Dhamma Vinaya, because the goal is not to try to recover some kind of lost original that we don't know where it is, but the goal is simply to read and understand the text that we have the best way possible. I hope that more or less is that okay as an answer, Bante?
Yeah. So I think that when we compare the Western textual criticism, when we compare with our Buddhist textual criticism, the one or the group that who is going to perform that activity, that would be far more complex to a greater extent than the Western textual criticism, because those people or that group should have the good philological knowledge, we call the epistemological knowledge, niruttinaya, and we are talking about going with the like Abhidhamma or Vinaya, these things. Those ones should have the greater knowledge about they should have the competency of the canonical literature and the commentarial literature, the expertise of the techniques of the commentary. So I think it should be far more complex when someone is going to do the textual criticism in the Buddhist like these books. That's so.
Yeah, I think as you said, more and more there are more skills that are added to the skill set that the philologist should have. Today, perhaps we could even say that IT or being skilled in using simply the tools to search for text, etc., is important. But I think what you pointed out, Bante, is an important difference also between the archetype of the philologist in the Sangha and the archetype of the philologist in a modern university. In the main criticism from the Sangha to this kind of professional philologists is that they are not very knowledgeable in the literature. Sometimes they haven't studied very deeply the Tipitaka and the commentaries and so on, and this is true. The main commentary the main criticism that comes from the other side, the philologists criticize sometimes monastic editions because the monastics are not enough familiar with the other aspects of the context of the Pali text. This includes that they are not familiar with Sanskrit, with Vedic Sanskrit, with Middle Indic. I can guarantee you that many times they are not even familiar with Middle Indic texts that are so important for Pali as they are the Ashokan inscriptions. So in the language of the Ashokan inscriptions, you can see certain features of different dialects, as you know very well. So the study of all these evidences and all these testimonies is something that Western philologists consider very important. And they realize that sometimes the monastic scholar lacks this kind of broad perspective when analyzing a certain Pali word. They cannot go beyond Pali, but the scholar who knows Sanskrit and Prakrit and Middle Indic, etc., sometimes they can see the right etymology where the Pali itself would become obscure. Of course, in the past, most Pali scholars, they knew Sanskrit. Like Buddhaghosa knew Sanskrit and many other languages. Sariputta, the 12th century commentator, he knew Sanskrit and many others. Moggallana, the grammarian, Kachayana, the grammarian, all the Pali grammarians, as you know, they tell you that you have to use Sanskrit grammar as well. And there are many Pali grammars that are based on Sanskrit grammars. Theory, there is no problem with that. But nowadays, it has been lost a little bit. So I think, excuse me, this and the, basically this was the point a little bit. For the students of Theravada to open a little bit the, let's say, open the windows of the room. See that there are other forms of Buddhism, early Buddhism, that in the sources, they are also called Teriya or Stavira, or very close to the Stavira. So in this way, we can also understand the origins of Theravada.
In my perspective, I think this is a very important and very critical task to preserve the Dhamma and Vinaya for future. So in my perspective, it should be done with the hybrid exposures from the monastic education, with the deep understanding about the foundations, and also with the exposure to the modern academic world, as you said, that philological understanding and more exposure to the world with this textual criticism. Then it would be the most ideal set of people who can perform this activity in a far better way.
I totally agree, Bante. And I think it will be easier for a Buddhist monk to become a good philologist and learn what the philologists know than for a philologist to learn what the Buddhist monk knows. So you have an advantage in this case.
I personally know that advantage.
Well,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
But maybe can ask Alex about a few questions. In some of your previous curriculums, you are expert in Parayana Vaka in Sutta Nipata. Also, it's my favorite process as well. It's 16 question and answer. Our students, yeah. So I just to know how do you use this philology method to go into that ancient Buddhist texts, and what do you find out?
That's an interesting question. And it's interesting, Bante, that you could find this information. It is true that when I did my second MA in Barcelona, I chose as the dissertation topic the Parayana Vagga of Sutta Nipata. And the reason is because the Sutta Nipata as a whole is very long, so I had to choose only one part of it. At that time, I have to confess that my knowledge of Pali was at the beginning. But I was very lucky to have a very good teacher, that is Earl Pin. Pin, that is not a very well-known scholar, but if you see the Kachayana and Kachayana Vutti edition of the Pali Text Society, the critical edition of the Kachayana, it was done by Pin. It took maybe 30 years or more than 30 years to complete that book. And he was one of the chief editors at the Critical Pali Dictionary in Copenhagen, in Denmark. So the way I met Pin was very simple. I didn't know him. At that time, I was not connected. I had done my master's degree in Pune, in India, and I was 26. So I went back to Europe, and in order to continue with the academic study, I had to do a second master's because the Indian master's was not accepted. So I had to do another master's. And I asked the university if they would allow me to write the dissertation about Pali, even though there were no Pali scholars. And they told me, if you can find a supervisor, do what you want. And you can write on whatever topic that should be an ancient language and culture. That's the MA degree, ancient languages and cultures. So I chose Pali. And then I just knew that Earl Pind was an expert in Pali grammar, and he was also in the critical Pali dictionary. So I just wrote an email to him asking if he could guide me, and also if I could visit him in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and read the Parayanavagga with him. So happily for me, he replied, and positively, that of course he would be delighted to be my co-supervisor, so that at least I have one of my supervisors is an expert in Pali, and he welcomed me to go to Denmark whenever I wanted to go. But I had to pay a fee. So at that time he was still working for the critical Pali dictionary, but the project was almost dead. That project always had funding problems, and the last 10 years it was funded by the Ukkyo Kenkyo Yokai from Japan, and they gave funding for 10 years. But then they told them that in order to complete the dictionary, they would need 120 more years of funding. Then they say, okay, we don't have 100 years of funding, so that's it, finish. So that means he wasn't a great expert. He worked for many prestigious projects and universities, but in his life, in his house, I share that with you so that you get an understanding of how many Pali scholars live or have lived in the West. In his house, he was not the breadwinner. His wife had the main job, and he was Pali scholar. So being a Pali scholar is not security, let's say. That's why he said, if you come, he didn't have any fixed income. You come, just pay a fee. And at that time, I had a scholarship from the university. So I say, okay, no problem. So I went there, and we did like in the ancient times in India. So I paid to the teacher the fee, and the teacher taught me a little bit of Pali. And it was very nice because I came to meet him in person. He passed away a few years ago, and unfortunately for me, he became very sick when I started my PhD in Cambridge. And he was supposed to be my external supervisor or something like this. Because of him, I went to Cambridge, basically. And he became very sick, and then he passed away a few years later. But the moments when we met, I was able to get a lot of knowledge of what it means to work on philology. He showed me the library of the critical Pali dictionary, which was very impressive. You have to remember that this is the library where the great European Pali scholars of the 20th century worked. And you could still, I don't know if you've seen the critical edition of the Saddhaniti by Helmer Smith. You had his books were there with their notes. So there was a kind of energy in that room where we were reading the Parayanavagga that I always associate the Parayanavagga with that. Like it's this quintessential ancient Pali text that for me was the beginning. And I could see how in reading the text with with my teacher, he would constantly open books and show me, in the Sanskrit roots, Sanskrit verbal roots, and this and that. And so I got an idea more or less of the method. And probably, if I'm here today, is among other people, the many people who helped me, because it's a difficult path for someone who is alone. But he was definitely an encouragement and a very good role model in his broad approach. Like actually, also that I encourage many of my students because he got his PhD when he was 65. the year he retired. So it was not a kind of PhD and then you make a career. No, and he was an expert in Tibetan. He could also read Chinese Buddhist texts, and the PhD was done in Vienna, and it's about Dignaga. It's about Pramana theory. So it's about some Sanskrit and Tibetan manuscripts dealing with the theory of language and I don't know if it's a Pramana Vinishchaya or one of these texts by Dignaga. That was his PhD. Very late in life because he generally worked for this project or that project. So what I can say about the Parayana and philology is this: it immediately reminded me of those days and how I could see in the model of Finn, someone who uncompromisingly decided to devote his life to scholarship, even though in terms of money or security, that was perhaps not the best idea, but nevertheless, he had a very beautiful family. He has a very beautiful family, and he could make it. And his publications on Pali grammar, even today, they remain the state of the art. Pali Vyakarana. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that story. It's very impressive. Because we have a few questions from the audience. First one is, if the x-axis is time and y-axis is religions, steadiness not how to reach the goal arahant in the negative slope today, because the collapse in the Buddhist era 5,000 and we have already passed the peak for 66 years.
So if because the sound there's a lot of echo, so I'm not sure I understood, but I think the question is like, the texts say that the sasana is going to last for 5,000 years, but now it seems that even after 2,500 years, we already see how it's going down. So
After how you already passed the middle way. So probably your first one is, how can we, how the religions get back, because we are like on this going down.
because I'm not an expert in religion, but I'm just let's say a tourist in the area of philosophy and religious studies, because it is inevitable. The way I see it is that if you read ancient texts all the time, like if that is your job, like my job, let's say most of the texts that I read every week were written at least 500 years ago or more. So you are reading texts that are very old all the time. And when I hear people today complaining about X, Y, or Z, I say, okay, yeah, this is the same complaint I saw in this text that was written 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Even if you go back to the earliest writings in the history of humankind, the poem of Gilgamesh from Sumeria, from the Middle East, that is like maybe 5,000 years old or so. Even that poem begins by saying, oh, in the ancient times, everything was great, but now it's going to the dogs, something like this. So it is normal that the sensitive people feel that their time is a catastrophe and that things are going very bad, because we have more information about our time and we get more negative input from our time. Whereas from the past, we generally get positive input. You all remember Buddhaghosa, right? Everyone remembers Buddha. Do you remember the bad Buddhist monks in the past? No. Everyone remembers the great ones. We don't remember the bad ones. But in the present day, everyone focuses on the bad ones. No one sees the good ones. In a 1,000 years, everyone will remember the good monks of today. No one will remember the bad ones. So I think there is a bias. Being in the present, we have a tendency to be very pessimistic. But ironically, I think this is good, because this is the way to stay alert. We can stay alert and vigilant, so we can see whether things are working or not. And if they are not working, we try to fix as much as we can. in our lives, most of the time, and we live almost like as a single. Like I don't live in a sangha. I'm a householder. I'm a gihi, as it would be said in upasaka or a gihi. You live in your house, like many lay people. What can we do? I think we have to see individually what can we do for others to make the world a little bit better than it was when we were born. And beyond that, I think it doesn't depend on us. It's very difficult to control. And that's why I think when the Buddha describes what is the world, he says the world is from the top of the head to your feet. That is the world. So when we worry about the world, primarily, I understand we have to worry about that to become as good persons as we can, and through this, then we can share with others.
For your encouraging answer. Says another one questions. Is this true? The more variety in ecosystem, the more strength of that ecosystem. But if the more variety or diversity of people is religion, the more chance of Buddhism dominate.
Not sure. The sound is there's a lot of echo here, and I couldn't. But is it okay if I come and listen to the question?
So is it true that the more variety in ecosystem, maybe I can. The more variety in ecosystem, the more strength of that ecosystem. But if the more variety or diversity of people in these regions, the more chance of Buddhism termination.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. So this is, I guess, about the analogy of if you want to save Buddhism. It's like it's almost like you want to save a very rare plant or a very rare species of animal in the sea or in the. So this is, of course, just a metaphor, and my point was simply to not to be in favor of diversity for the sake of diversity, because obviously, if suppose I think that Theravada Buddhism is good, then I would like to share it with everyone, and I would like the whole world to become Theravada Buddhism. But if I'm Muslim and I believe that Islam is good, I want everyone to become Islam. If I'm Christian, same. Every person, or if someone is atheist, only believes in science, they believe that science will save everyone. That's the only way. So again, I think if we go back in our text, these discussions are already there at the time of the Buddha. And the Buddha in the Nikayas, he doesn't seem that interested in that people convert or they call themselves this or that. But he's more interested in the people following a certain path, whatever name they can call it. So in that sense, of course, variety for the sake of it is not good, because we cannot say that it's good that there is variety. Some people steal, some people don't steal, some people kill, some people. So it's good that we have a variety. This is, of course, this would be illogical. The best thing is that nobody kills, nobody steals, ideally. So there is no variety. Everyone is good. But the reality is what it is. And then when it comes to religions, one of the points of my talk, I think, was that not to worry too much about identity and worry about what is true and what is not true. And to discover that, we need to talk with many different types of people. If we only talk and discuss with one type of person, we will never go beyond that, and maybe we are wrong. But just to check if this is true or not, we need to discuss, be open, as the Buddha says. Check if this is according to truth, we accept. If it's not according to truth, we can say that we are not interested. But we don't need to become anxious or defensive because someone is attacking us or our religion. What we are ultimately, we are interested in the truth. So that's more or less what I could say.
Okay, thank you. Questions for your answer? Okay, so I think um, if from the Thomas,
Thank you everyone again for coming here, for having me in. It was a very nice experience. Thank you.
have a 15-minute break from here to 45. Next session. Back in 15 minutes.